G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. Can't wait to get into today's episode to inspire, improve and impact you with Dr. Jack Groppel. He's the co-founder of the Johnson & Johnson Human Performance Institute. He's been inducted into the United States Professional Tennis Association Hall of Fame, and he's had a profound influence in the world of athletics, in sports science and in the corporate world. He will be sharing his 3 C's as to what makes a great coach. So let's get started.
Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, coaching for success in sport and business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let 'em have it, coach.
G'day everybody, inspire, improve, impact. I am here with Jack Groppel. I am so excited to chat to you. Jack, how are you, mate? Thanks for being on the show.
Very good. It's great to talk with you, Emma. Thank you.
All right, so let's kick it off. It is the Vegemite question. You either love it or you hate it. What's it's a pattern break.
No
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've tried it. No, it wasn't a specialty. I certainly don't look at it like peanut butter. Let's put it that way.
All right. Because you answered that way, can you kick off our episode with your worst coaching moment and what might be a lesson or two?
The worst coaching moment, I can't mention the name of the athlete because it's too confidential, but it was an athlete that I was trying to work with who had addiction issues. I mean, it was really clinical. And I was trying to help and support the athlete and coach. And I realized that I had to hand him off to a clinician. His problem wasn't quote unquote a coachable problem. He needed true help. It wasn't even a mental health issue. It was mental illness and it was an addiction. So that was a very difficult moment for me because when you're a coach, you believe you can help everybody. I had to eat humble pie and say, this is not my sweet spot. And I'm still involved in that person's life, by the way, and supporting him and have been able to do some coaching. But it was at that moment in time where I couldn't coach him. He needed actual medical help.
What a great lesson straight away in knowing when to wear what hat, and also the importance of as a coach in having a team around us so that we can refer people on to other people that we know and trust as well. What about on the flip side, a coaching moment that went really well and what might be a lesson?
Well, it's kind of it's a funny story, and I have to be really careful because I want your listeners to. I'm not taking credit for this. So, but the urban legend happens. So the funniest coaching story happened in the late '80s, and I was at Ferris State University. Scott Schultz was the head of the Ferris State program, and for me, I just love telling the story. And I did a program for all the Ferris State students on I think it was a Thursday or something like that. And they all knew that Paul Rodert at the USTA, Paul was the administrator of sports science, and I was the director of player development for the Hopman tennis camp at Saddlebrook. They needed me to go to Palm Springs to work with Michael Chang. And it was basically about Michael's nutrition and fitness and everything else. And I'm not going to tell you the long story about it. I'll tell you the funny, because what is the funny story about it? So I had a great session with the students at Ferris State. It was awful weather. I mean, feet of snow, not inches of snow, feet of snow. Fly from Grand Rapids through Chicago to Palm Springs, work with Michael for a few days. And then I worked with Michael a lot over that next few months. And lo and behold, 3 months later, he wins the French Open. And the whole urban legend is that I went out and changed his whole fitness, which I did. I changed his fitness program quite a bit and worked with him a lot on nutrition. But Michael had to hit all those balls. I didn't hit a ball. But the urban legend is that I had a lot of influence on that. So I just think that's a funny story. And I think we got to be careful when we take credit and things like that for our athletes. And I've got a lot of stories like that in tennis, and I've been really blessed in the sport.
And isn't it funny? Sometimes there's a change of coach and all of a sudden that team wins 2 rounds and it's all the credit, sometimes too much credit be placed on the coach.
I agree 100%. I think at the end of the day, we as coaches have to realize that athlete still has to hit the ball. We can do all that we want, but they've still got to execute. And, I think sometimes, at this stage in my life, I can say this. I think it's easy to get a little full of yourself.
Yeah. What about in the business world?
There's been numerous, and I've been really blessed, as I said, when someone comes up to you and says, are you here a month later that their marriage got back together, or that they were able to work with a boss that was impossible to work with? Or, I'm trying not to, I don't want to be arrogant about this, but it happens a lot. I mean, Jim Lair and I were able to create a business model that was very, very successful. As you know, we were acquired by Johnson & Johnson, and we had the great fortune to be very successful in the application of sports science concepts to business people. Now, there are some funny corporate stories too. I mean, I was in Germany once training, and I did a one-day program, and I talked about everything. And one of the things, for whatever reason, something I said about nutrition stuck with one of the people in the room. And he walks up to me and in his best English, he goes, I have to tell you that I've got your nutrition issue solved. And I said, you do? Like that? I said, how's that? And he goes, well, when I go home after work every night, I put my eating pants on. And I said, what? And he's, yeah, it's sweatpants with no elastic in it. And he called those his eating pants. So you have those in business too.
That is hilarious. I could just visualize that came to very strong. That's great. All right. What about, can you share with us a sliding doors moment in your life?
For me, this is a no-brainer. I mean, I give this person, every award I've ever received, I give this person a shout out. So here I was. A lot of people don't know my story. My undergraduate degree was actually in wildlife biology, because I got my degree. My father, because I didn't get a scholarship to play for the University of Illinois, and I was going to walk on, and he said, well, if I've got to pay for your education, you've got to study something. So our whole family were farmers. So I had to study agriculture. So I went to Illinois and studied agriculture for the sole reason that I could play tennis. And I was blessed to be able to make the team, and I did, and met some unbelievable people, had a fun time playing tennis in the Big Ten. But I got my undergraduate degree in wildlife biology. Well, when I graduated, I couldn't get a job. So I went back to grad school, and I started grad school in population genetics. And being an outdoors guy, my whole brain was going to be studying migratory habits of wildlife. But to study population genetics in a lab, here's one of the things you have to do. And I totally mean this. This is going to be funny, and I mean it to be funny. I, honest to gosh, had to go to a lab twice a week and get test tubes that were full of flour and put fresh flour in the test tubes, so these tiny beetle called Tribolium beetle that are about the size of a pen or pencil lead could breed more rapidly, so that we could study progeny of offspring and quantify them. So I love to say, this is going to be the PG rated part, but I love to say that my role as a grad student was creating an environment so beetles could procreate more quickly. And at 22, Emma, I was a mess. I'll never forget it. I was a mess. And my sister talked me into going to talk to people in kinesiology. And my dad and I were very estranged. And I said, my dad will kill me. And she said, go ahead. It doesn't matter. Dad doesn't even need to know yet. You don't know what you don't know. And I met, and the department head admitted me to the program. I knew nothing. The first semester I had to take cadaver anatomy, kinesiology, and ex-phys, and I fell in love with the field. I got straight A's, but I still was lost. So here I am, 22 and a half, lost, got straight A's, don't even have any idea what I'm going to do. But Dr. Charles Dillman, here's the moment you asked for. Dr. Charles Dillman, May of 1974, it was a very cold, crisp day in Champaign, Illinois, and he said to me, and Illinois has written about this for alumni, and he said 17 words to me. He said, Jack, if you really apply yourself, you could one day become a pioneering leader in the science of tennis performance. And that was all it took. That was all. I created my own career. I created my own field of study. I did everything on my own. There was no field. Vic Braden was doing quite a bit. Stanley Plagenhoff out of Massachusetts was doing quite a bit. And that was it. and myself. And Vic Braden took me under his wing. Vic did an awful lot. Vic was an unbelievable mentor for me, as he was to hundreds and thousands who just loved him to death. But Vic opened a lot of doors for me as well. But Chuck Dillman saying those 17 words was the sliding door moment.
And isn't it interesting? We never realized the full power of an off-the-cuff comment. Not to say it was off the cuff, but sometimes as coaches, we can make these statements where we really do believe in somebody. And years later, they can come up to you and say, I'll never forget that day when we were sitting on the bleachers and you said this. And sometimes as coaches, we don't always remember what we said until they, maybe they triggered the memory. But the power of those 17 words and the power that we have as coaches with those statements is something that we should never take for granted.
Never, because, and Dr. Dillman and I, unfortunately, he's not in very good shape right now, but his daughter and I are communicating on LinkedIn. And when I was inducted into the Hall of Fame, I sent the acceptance speech where I mentioned him. I try to let him know the impact he had on me.
Coming full circle as well. That's right. Awesome. All right. Our next question is our guiding question. You have answered it before. I'm very grateful that you feature in What Makes a Great Coach. It is in 1 to a maximum of 3 words. What do you think makes a great coach?
Well, when you asked me this, it came to me. And then, to be very honest, I mean, I don't think about, this isn't something that I keep on my radar every day. I'm just being very honest. But I think it comes down to connection. We're in the connection business. We're in the relationship business. So it's 3 C's. And the first C is connection. Above all else, connect. Don't just speak. I think sometimes I love that part of it where we learn everything. We learn about how to read. We learn how to write. We learn how to speak. Nobody teaches us how to listen. And to have a true connection, you learn how to listen. And I think, so connection is number 1. Number 2 is character. Who are you ethically? Who are you at your core? And does your core come out? Here I am at my stage in life. I mean, I had someone write about this yesterday. I don't feel this way, but they said, I gave a keynote yesterday and virtual, and someone commented online about, Jack doesn't have to do this anymore. Well, yes, Jack does, between you and me. I mean, Jack loves doing this. Jack thrives in doing this. Jack wants to help people. I don't want to just go off to the pasture. I mean, as long as God's got this working, I'm going to be working. And so character, who are you at your core, and why are you a coach? So connection and character, then curiosity. I mean, that at the end of the day, that's been the core of who I am, because creating my own field and starting in the sports sciences back in 1974 is when I started. So I don't mind that people know the issue of being curious was at the essential part of who I am. How did things start happening? I will tell you, and I talk to my students about this a lot. Like World Tennis exists. There were 2 magazines, Tennis and World Tennis. I'll never forget it. And again, I'm not going to mention a name, but in the early 80s, there was at the US Open, I wasn't affiliated with USTA yet. I became the chairman of sports science in 86. So this is about 82. But there was someone, and it wasn't Vic. It was a former professional player giving tips. And they gave an incorrect tip about how to hit topspin on the ball. And I was sitting in my living room in Champaign, Illinois, and I'm going, oh, really? And so I broke down all these high-speed films. I took still shots. I sent it to World Tennis Magazine. I said, why don't you really have why don't we write how to teach? And then suddenly I became an instruction editor. And then suddenly I got involved with Tennis Magazine. And for 12 years, I was an instruction editor for Tennis Magazine. But that was how I got in, was I saw something being said incorrectly, had another vehicle, because CBS wasn't, that was CBS. I think it was CBS was televising it. You're not going to get their attention, but a tennis magazine, I could get their attention. So I sent all this, and then World Tennis invited me to write. And that was how I did it. And then as you might know, I had the Ask the Professor column in the U.S. Professional Tennis Association for 25 years. So that was how I started writing.
And I just want to pick up on how, even like in that story, the importance of questioning. Sometimes we get on the bandwagon when something's popular or trendy, or, remember the multi-segment forehand? You pull it back with your elbow, and then we were all out there teaching it. I mean, because it was trendy and it was popular, and one person had success, and then we all taught it. But I think that's what curiosity does. It's a real superpower of coaches. I'm going a bit off topic here, but why do you think more people are not curious?
Well, I think we get set in our ways. I think one of the dangers in coaching is you coach the way you were coached and you're not curious. And I think, to be curious, I always tell people, even at my age, I never want to lose my childlike curiosity. Young children have a curiosity that I believe is profound, to ask why. And that was what I did. I'm all about, if there's an issue, what's the solution? I'm not about, this is wrong, I'm complaining. No, let's solve it. If there's a problem, let's solve it. That's where the curious nature comes in. For example, the multi-segment forehand, I never jumped on that bandwagon. If you look at my books back in 78 and 82 and 92, I talked about the unit turn. I talked about keep the strokes very, very simple. And that came from high-speed film of the greatest athletes in the world, that they had the simplest strokes in the world. So I never jumped on that bandwagon.
When you get to meet other successful entrepreneurs and business coaches and people at the top of their field, whether it be sport or business, what's that one question that you always ask? What sparks Jack's curiosity?
Why do you do what you do? I want to hear. And by the way, there's no judgment on their answer either. I mean, because I've heard all the way from I want to make millions to I care about changing people's lives to I want to develop a new technique of understanding. I want to develop a new environment in the workplace. There's all kinds of answers, but I always love to understand why. Why are you doing this?
I think it fuels coaches' energy as well, because when that's really clear, when that answer is really clear, for me right now in my life, I've never been clearer. And in fact, for many years, I've struggled to answer that question because it's almost like I've liked so many different elements of coaching that I sometimes was like, I coach sometimes because I really love inspiring kids, or I really love working with adults, or I really love working in corporate. But for me right now, my purpose has never been clearer, which fuels my energy and my motivation. What are your thoughts on that?
That's key, because I would tell everyone, and I just taught this yesterday with the group that I did the virtual keynote for. The most important question you'll ever ask yourself is what matters most right now. And don't just coach to be teaching something or to be helping. Why are you doing it? What matters most to you? Adopting my son from China, for example, my life changed the day they put that screaming 3.5-year-old in my arms. I'd never had children before. And I go from not being a dad to being a dad in a second. And he hated my guts. So I had to figure, okay, how am I going to create safety? Why am I here? Why did I go to China? Why? I mean, I climbed Kilimanjaro with him 5 years ago. That's he and I at the summit. Awesome. Right behind me. And he was 12 years old when we did that. I've got artificial knees. Why would you do that? Because I needed to create an adventure for he and I. Whether we made it or not, it was all about purpose. But it was answers to the why.
And what did he discover about you from that experience?
He had no idea that I loved the outdoors as much as I do. I'll never forget him saying one day on a training hike, we were in the woods somewhere I don't even know where we were, but he said, "Dad, the one thing I've learned now in all this training is that you are in your peaceful place when you're in the outdoors." And that meant so much to me because that's how I did grow up.
And what has tennis helped you discover about yourself?
Well, A lot. I mean, I owe everything to tennis. As a child, as a young boy, as a teenager and a young man, tennis saved me from my father. I mean, my father and I had a very strange relationship, and tennis got me out of the house. Tennis got me a great education, even though I didn't have a scholarship, but tennis got me through. Tennis created it was an avocation. I loved it so much, and then it became a vocation. And then I was able to meet somebody like Jim Lair, and we were able to take our love for what we were doing and apply it and do something else. And I mean, we've honestly been able, I've been able to live the dream. I mean, honestly, I've been so blessed. I mean, you think about, again, and I'm not bragging because I'm not about this at all, but it's so humbling to think that you started a business from nothing with one other guy. We started in 2 3-bedroom condominiums, and now we were acquired by Johnson & Johnson, and now it's several it's a 100,000 foot facility in Orlando that is what we created. And to think that is even possible is beyond it pinch me, just pinch me.
So on that note, transferring tennis and the corporate athlete over into business, what do you think are some of the real parallels, like those real tennis sort of I always talk about in my book, micro moments of resiliency, right? We've got 20 seconds between points. How quickly can you get over yourself? And in business, you need to have that, those micro moments of resiliency. So it's almost future-based thinking and not dwelling too much on the past is one of my things that I always talk about, how tennis can really benefit corporate. What are some of your go-to parallels that crosses over?
Yeah, well, what we always believed, I mean, we had the 3 sciences: physiology, psychology, and nutrition. And that was the 3 sciences by which we developed the content for the Human Performance Institute. And physiologically, the physical training, and to help executives see, their perception is, I sit at a desk all day, I don't need to be fit. When in fact, what we start doing is talking about how the brain lights up when you get up and move. And the more often you move throughout your day, I just had an article that was published in SHRM, an interview. I was part of the interview, Society for Health, Human Resource Management. And they talked about the microbursts of recovery, because we know that you mobilize oxygen to the brain if you get up and move more often. And we learned that from physical activity. Nutrition, that food is a drug. I mean, the drugs you put in your body as food, that's going to light up your brain or it's going to slow you down. I mean, how are you eating? How are you feeling? And then the psychology is amazing. I mean, because you can get into what's a counterproductive behavior, what's a productive behavior, what's a, how do you visualize? How do you recover, to your point? How do you recapture energy after a rough meeting? How do you prepare? How do you go from the emotional hit in the face to high performance? We learned all that from sport, and we were able to apply it to business.
So I want to talk about agape. I would love to hear your definition of it, because when you're the one who first introduced me to the word when we caught up about a year ago, and its place in the workplace, and also for those people that sort of are the naysayers around love in the workplace. What are you talking about, Jack?
Yeah. And I understand it. First of all, again, historically, we have to understand, in the late 80s and early 90s, when Jim Lair and I were talking about purpose, we were shown the door. It was soft. It was, don't bring that in the door. Stephen Covey was doing it. We were doing it. There were a few others, but we were shown the door. And I think now we've come, if you think about, again, I know I'm doing a historical walk, but if you look at post 95, I love doing this when I'm in corporate groups. Anybody that was in the workforce before 1995, the moment you left your workplace, it was very hard to find you. People had to leave a message on a machine, or you might have had a cell phone, but they had to have contingency plans when you left the office. Well, that's gone. Because with the internet and smartphones, you are accessible 24/7, 365. Who taught us Who's taught us how to have boundaries? Who's taught us how to be intentional? Who's taught us how to make the right choices? So now let's keep going with this purpose timeline. Purpose is now well accepted. Everybody talks about purpose. You got to find your purpose. You got to have purpose. The purpose will help you perform. And I love talking about it now, 30 years later, but remembering 30 years ago, we were shown the door. And 2 years ago, 2.5, 3 years ago, I was in a conversation with Stanford University, and I said, I think the next step, and this is right in the middle of the pandemic, I think the next step in the business world is agape love, which is unconditional love. And I said, now, and everybody take a deep breath, because stay with me, because I know the visceral reaction that throws out. I think people struggle with the word love because they don't define it the correct way. Love has many different definitions. If you look at the Greek, there's numerous definitions for the word love. I mean, the one that everybody resorts to quickly is eros love, which is romantic love or erotic love. That's not what we're talking about. The other one is phileo love, which is brotherly or sibling love. I'm talking about agape love, which is unconditional love of one's neighbor, of one's ally, not a friend. It could be an enemy. I mean, you could argue Jack started to get into the Bible and everything else. I don't care, whatever you want to say right now. But if we could make that shift of how we as leaders lead, and if we lead from, yes, let's help people find their purpose, but let's, even if it's not outwardly, let's intrinsically work from a standpoint of agape love toward people, and let's teach it. I think we'd have a very different world, Emma. I think we'd have a very, very different world if we level set ourselves with that word.
I worked with a concreting manufacturing company recently, and one of their guiding principles is to assume a positive intent.
Yeah.
When we go into a conversation, when we go into a moment of conflict, often conflict is where we're servicing an unmet need as well.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, conflict can be healthy. Again, we have lost in our society right now, we have lost the ability to have healthy debate. We have lost the ability to disagree and then to talk it out and find common ground. Honestly, it's gone. You're either right or you're wrong, and that's it. Well, you're not coming from a place of love when you take that perspective. You're beginning with a place of hate. And I know that's a very strong word, but I believe that's where you are. If you've got a boundary and you're not willing to at least understand someone else's point of view, that's an issue. That's a problem.
So how do we get back?
Well, I think we have to all start from what do we have in common? Now, right away, if you say nothing, that's not true, because we're human beings and we're breathing the same air and we've got to eat food. So don't even start with there's nothing common, because we've got to go back. Even if we go back to basic biology, start there. That, there's basic biology, start there. And you can always find a place of commonality to work from, even if it's at the most mundane, basic, fundamental level.
So does work-life balance really exist, Jack?
Well, that was what I was interviewed in SHRM. It does not. It's more work-life integration. In other words, because balance, if you think about balance, physics, what I grew up in sports science, a balance is like a teeter-totter. You're never going to find that in business. You spend more time working than you do anything else in your life. You're not going to find an equal balance, but you can learn to integrate your work in your life. And you can learn to have boundaries in your work in your life. And you can learn to be intentional in your work in your life. So I think it was brilliant that SHRM is the most well-known human resource company or organization in the world. And I'm so pleased that they came out with this article. It just came out 3 days ago.
Okay, well, I'll make sure I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, you should. It'd be good.
100%.
Yeah.
The Coaching Podcast is sponsored by the Samson Agency, a boutique talent agency managing entertainers, artists, and athletes. You can learn more at thesamsonagency.com. And if you're interested in becoming a coach, check out opendoorcoachingusa.com for all our latest courses in Leader as Coach and our High Performance Workplace Coaching certification. Now let's get back to the show. You know, we spoke about earlier those 17 words that change your life. You know, who are some people that you follow or even quotes that you live by?
A person that I always quote, John Wooden, the very famous basketball coach. He is, I mean, you just look him up. I mean, the quotes are just amazing. You can find John Wooden quotes everywhere. And he was a very spiritual man. But he knew how to coach. This is a man that coached at the highest level of college basketball, coached some of the greatest stars ever to play the game, Bill Walton, Lou Alcindor, who became Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, many others. And he was able to work with them through love. It comes back to agape. Here was a man who worked with high performers, and he was able to coach them from a position of love. So if I were to tell people to follow someone, it would be the work of John Wooden.
It's withstood the test of time, hasn't it?
It really has.
Especially as it relates to character as well.
Yes.
All right, let's finish with in 1 to a maximum of 3 words. What do you think makes a great leader?
Well, I think if you're giving me that limitation, I've just got to come up with one word, and that's character. And caring. Let's get another C, character and caring.
Yeah.
So you've got high character with yourself, but you care about other people. You're not just out for the dollar. You've got to make a dollar because that's what business is. But a great leader has high character, and they're very caring in how they work and how they interact with people.
Yep. Well, Jack, we could talk for another hour on all of these topics.
Love to.
But it was a pleasure to have you on the show with connection, character, curiosity, care, and so much more. Agape love. Thank you from my heart to yours for being on the show.
Thank you. It was my privilege. Thank you for inviting me to be with you.
And if you enjoyed this episode of the Coaching Podcast, please share it with a fellow coach. And thanks for listening.